Hi, we are talking to parents of teenagers today. If you've pushed play, we are trusting that there are teens in your life that you love and care about and likely are parenting. We have invited Melissa Kruger on to talk to us about parenting teens. This is based on her new book, Parenting with Hope. I love that title because I need it. Raising Teens for Christ in a Secular Age. Melissa serves as the Vice President of Discipleship Programming for the Gospel Coalition, and she is the author of multiple books, and she is a mom. So she's got lots of authority on this and lots of great ideas. She's married to Mike, who is the president of Reformed Theological Seminary, and they have 3 children. So I don't think there's really any question why we are talking about raising teens with hope in a time that feels very complicated, very overwhelming to parents of faith. And so we're not going to really jump so much into the why as maybe the how. So let's welcome Melissa. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you ladies.
Yes. Well, just to give us some context, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, so I have 3 kids. My oldest is 24. I say that we added a child to our home this summer. My 24-year-old got married this summer. And so now I got a new son-in-law by marriage. And so I was like, this is a great way to birth a child. You just marry him off. And we
He
love
just
him.
appears.
Yeah, he just appears fully raised and he's delightful. So we're very thankful for that. So, and then my son is 21 and my youngest is getting ready to turn 18. She's still at home, but we are going through all the college applications, which I'm sure y'all are very familiar with. We're in that season right now with her. So I'm on the edge of the empty nest and feeling very sad about that.
I know. And we appreciate them sometimes more when they're gone, right? We realize, wait, they weren't so bad. I liked having them around.
There's something just about the the movement of the home that shifts with every child that leaves. It just gets a little quieter and a little quieter. And we love that quiet at some sense, but then, it's going to be really quiet next year. So it'll be a new change.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of angst in parenting teenagers. So I hear both of you talking and saying, yeah, I love teenagers. I love this season, but that's not the story for everyone. There is actually a lot of tension around parenting teenagers. And it feels like then those people that aren't in a good place with their teenagers, then they're looking at those people that are, and they're feeling, what did I do wrong? And they're pointing the finger at themselves. And they're like, how did my child get wrapped up in this? And this person's child didn't. Why did that happen? And I just think there's such a spectrum right now of where teenagers are at. And some are hardly able to get out of bed in the morning. And some are thriving and they're headed off to college and they're flying through life, it seems. And then there's everywhere in between. And so can you start by just speaking a little bit to that spectrum and where teenagers are and where parents are in the midst of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to say. There is this huge spectrum. And so what I always like to begin with, whatever your teenager's story, it's not just their story. God is working in your story in whatever teenager you have. I think sometimes we look at our teenagers and we're so consumed with what did I do wrong? Why is this season so hard? We're forgetting that God, that's part of our story too. And it's part of something we might be suffering through. And God might be working on us in certain ways, just like he'd be working on us if we were dealing with an illness or something else in our life. All suffering apart from God in some sense would just be vain, right? And in the world's eyes. But because we're Christians, we actually know God's doing something in that suffering. And for a mom's heart, I'm not sure there's a deeper suffering than when our kids are suffering. And when we're watching them walk through hard things, all we want to do is fix it. So the thing I trust in is when God sees me having to bear that hardness with my kid working, he sees me with those same eyes. I'm his child. So while we're parents and we're so used to carrying all these burdens, we do have he calls himself Father. And I find that really actually hopeful. I'm not alone, because I think, here's the thing, every mom feels alone in her personal journey with her kids. I'm dealing with struggles with my kids that might look like, well, that would be easy to deal with to you, but it's my child's struggle, and I'm still bearing that. And some people are bearing struggles that we all look at and say, I don't know what I'd do in that case. And the Lord will be with her as well. I really do believe that. But I think it is a really difficult thing in our world of comparison to think somebody's doing it better, someone's got it easier. I will say this, I was a high school teacher. That's my background. I love teenagers. I genuinely love them enough to professionalize, go into this professionally, and be around them all day. And I will say, I mean, some kids just really struggle in these years, and you see, but they don't always stay there. And I think that's important to realize too. Like, this is one part of their story. And it's really not about us as the parents. It's about how do we walk with them through this part of their story. And I think getting that focus off of ourselves onto God and even onto our teen can help as we're whatever stage of parenting we're in, or whatever struggle of parenting we're in.
I do want to pause right there and talk a little bit about what you said about it being part of the parent's story, because I think this is really a hard thing. And I hear people talk about this all the time, just my friends who are raising teens or young adults, that they say, well, I can't really share that because that's their story to share. And there is truth to that. I mean, they're the ones living it. And so it's their story to share. But at the same time, I think what parents are feeling is, but it's also my story. And so how do you manage that tension? Because you're trying to preserve the dignity and integrity in that relationship, trust really in that relationship. And yet it's also a part of your story. So what do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if anytime we know that prayer matters, it's in parenting teens, because there are some parts of my kids' stories I haven't told anyone. I haven't shared with any of my friends because it's so delicate, but I have told the Lord a lot about it. I have journaled a lot about it. And I believe that really matters. But I also think it's helpful. I mean, we have so many resources now that we can go to, like podcasts. I mean, so if we know our child's dealing with a particular issue, a lot of times we can go somewhere and find help a little bit more specific to our need. I also think older women in the church, that's always a little bit of a safer place to me, to find someone 20 years older than me who's not in my circle of friends, who maybe doesn't, it's a little different. Like if we three were together and all of our kids had grown up together, those are the people I most want to share with. But that might not be the best thing in this season, because it might really change how one of you views my child in a way, and something might slip to your child, and then your child says something to my child. I mean, we want to avoid that, I think. So finding older people that we can trust, who we can go to and say, hey, this is really hard. Will you pray for me in it? Those are the things I found. But I think that's why it makes it a really lonely season for moms of teens.
And the benefit of women who are 20 years ahead is maybe they have experienced not just that hard, but also the redemption that has happened after. And that can provide some hope and point toward hope. Not always, but often.
Well, and they've maybe heard their friends' stories 10 years later. And so we all get collective stories the older we get, because it's not just our experience, it's the experiences we've walked through friends with. So I have friends right now who are in the middle of some really difficult public stories. I mean, because when your kid goes to a treatment center, it's public that they're not in your house anymore, and so they'll be that woman in 20 years I could point someone to, but right now she's in the middle of her story, and they need people older people they can reach out to. Cause I mean, I'm like, I can pray for her, but that's where I am as a friend. And that's part of our role as friends, to really pray and do that. But I don't have lived experience with a lot of things my friends are facing. And I think to have the humility to know we don't know what's best. But we serve a God who can make that clear.
I think that's really important, that piece right there. And that is that everyone is living their own story. So every child is different. Every family is different, and to let people be different, to let
Mhm.
them navigate it the way that they feel called and led by the Lord to navigate it. Because maybe that's not the way you would navigate it, but that is, we have to trust that God is speaking to me. God is speaking to you uniquely. God is speaking to them uniquely. And that is how God is leading them in their story, which is not your story. And so I think even that judgment piece, that people can be so hard on each other. And instead, why don't we come alongside each other and support each other rather than, well, that's not how I do it, which feels so judgmental as opposed to compassionate or loving, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think we really don't know what we do because it's not our situation. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
so easy to look over the fence when kids are struggling. I mean, and this starts in the toddler years, right? It's like,
Mhm.
or a kid who's not sleeping through the night. And we're like, well, if you just put them on the program, then they'd sleep through the night. Yeah, this judgment in motherhood,
Totally.
we've got to let go of. I mean, we've really got to let go of because we just don't know what we don't know. And I mean, if wisdom
Mhm.
teaches us anything, it's we don't know what we don't know. And I think that's why, and it sounds like I'm saying something trite, but the real way we love our teens and we love our friends who are raising teens is to pray. Because I don't know. I'm finite. I'm limited, but like God knows everything. God can put me in a situation where I happen to be at church one Sunday and I sit next to the very older woman I should talk to about this. He can
Mhm.
arrange that.
Mhm.
I I can't make that happen, but he can do that. So I think people always tell you that you're going to have to become more prayerful as they age. But I have felt that in every way. I feel so much less in control of what my teens are going through, my ability to help. You miss the days of a band-aid and a kiss making it all better, you
Right.
know? And we know first heartbreaks,
Mhm.
that takes time. Those things aren't easy. So we're learning and growing hopefully as people as we parent these teenagers.
Yeah. Boy, that's true. That's really true. And the prayer life is how we survive. It's how we get up in the morning and say, I don't know how I'm going to face this thing, this situation, this circumstance with my child. Okay, Lord, I don't know. So I'm trusting you to get me through it. And especially if it's something you don't feel like you can talk to many people about. So let's talk about how we parent during this time. So this is a time of transition for kids if they are on the developmentally typical scale. They're becoming more independent and having their own ideas and their own opinions. And so give us some wisdom, Melissa, on how we guide our kids in a time in history when things might feel really crazy outside of our homes. How do we put down some roots inside of our homes with our kids who may or may not be open to some of the things we're saying?
Yeah, that's a good question. At the beginning of the book, I actually talk about this season being a little bit like trying to learn how to drive a stick shift car. I don't know if you remember
Mm-hmm.
this back in the day. You have to learn how to put your foot on the brake, but start to give gas and hit the clutch at the exact right moment. And if you don't, you stall. And I think parenting teens is a little bit like that. Like, when do I need to hit the brake? When do I need to hit the gas? When's it okay? And it's going to be different with each kid. So it's not only it's different for every family, it's different for each kid. I have boy and I have two girls, and they are developmentally different. Boys' frontal lobes form at different times. They're going through different struggles that each of them has gone through
Mm-hmm.
totally different struggles than the others. So there is this notion that I think when you have younger kids, you can say these are the family rules, and it can be a little bit more across the board. This is what we do. I think as we move into the teen years, what can really help is to see each child as an individual. I'm big on having conversations, not just having rules at this age. So the principle stays the same. I'm the parent, you're the child. The practice of that principle changes as your child ages. So when they're two, I say don't run out in the street. I don't have a big chat with you about that. I don't ask you how you feel about that. I just say, don't run in the street. You're going to have to come inside if you do that. It's just the rule, right? As a teenager, I think there's a conversation to be had, because what we're seeking to do is help train their heart, not just their behavior. We want them to understand, hey, if you drink and drive, these are some of those implications of what might happen. It's not just, hey, don't ever do this. You'll be in so much trouble if you do this. Let's have a conversation about why these choices have huge ramifications. And I'm trying to protect you in this, not keep you from life. So I think at this age, kids needed to be invited into the how do we come to these conclusions? You can still have rules. I'm all for having family expectations, but I think the communication of those really needs to grow as our kids grow.
Yeah, I could not agree more. That whole parenting according to the individual, it's just critical. We have to. And if we're looking at through this lens of how do we infuse hope into our homes, into our families, into really our worldview, our prayer life, it really is. We have to tailor it. We have to, because every child responds differently to rules or to standards that the family has, or to their environment, or to their friends. And every child is so unique. And so as we're looking at this idea of hope, how do we bring hope into, I mean, I hear you kind of in a subtle way talking about that, but how do we bring hope to these relationships with our
Yeah,
teens?
I think with teens, a lot of people are hoping in a really short-term gain. I want this season to go well. I want my kid to like me. I mean, we can hope in the wrong things. I just want them to get asked to prom or whatever. Yeah, I mean, we all have
Mhm.
we have these things we want for our kids. But I think when I'm talking about hope, the object of our hope really matters. So I think too often we put our hope in things that aren't secure. And the reality is the only thing that what the Bible tells us over and over, put your hope in God. And I think what that means in the teen years is to be able to say, I don't know why my child's going through this. I don't know why it's their senior year and they've never been asked to a dance. And these are simple things I'm sharing. I mean, I know we have much more heart wrenching, but these things get to us as parents too. I can't hope that their circumstances are always going to be easy, because the reality is, I look around and I'm like, no one gets an easy pass in life. This is a world full of suffering. This is a world that's hard. So our kids, I can't hope that I'm going to prevent them from suffering. What we hope in is that God is with us in the midst of this, and that
Mhm.
he is doing something that will actually ultimately be for their good. That is a place that's secure for my hope. Just them getting an easy pass, them getting into the college I want, them never getting a speeding ticket or being arrested or never doing drugs or never doing alcohol. I can't put my hope there. I can pray. I can pray and ask God to protect them from everything. But my hope's got to be in, I'm going to trust in God in this. I'm not going to parent out of fear all my life, because what fear does is leads to control. And
Mhm.
that's a terrible environment to grow up in. Or fear can also lead to our emotional security being so wrapped up in our kid being okay that it is an enormous burden on our teenager. If they are walking around thinking, well, mom is all wrapped up in if I have a good group of friends, or if whatever it might be, I think we can go two ways. We can either be so fearful socially that they're not okay, or so fearful that they never make a mistake, that we get controlling. And our kids, that's a pressure cooker from us that they're forced to grow it up into. Whereas when I put my hope in God, and I lay it before him and I say, I can't make their life okay, that actually makes me a better parent,
Mm.
rather than trying to navigate all of life to make sure everything's okay for them. But rather than, because what it allows me to do, it allows me to come side by side with my teen and say, I don't even know what we should do here, but I'm going to be here with you. We're going to walk through it together. That actually brings the temperature down for them too, and gives them, it makes you a safe place to talk to, because they know you don't know everything. And that's okay for them to know we don't know everything, because we don't. And I think when they start to see that, they warm up to us, rather than when we get controlling or fearful or anxious. They can feel that pressure cooker and they run from it.
Okay, so I want to do like a real life scenario. So let's say there is a child who, let's just use dating, because there's a lot of influence in dating. So let's say your child is dating someone and your red flags are going up and there's some fear rising up, and you're like, oh, this significant other is gaining kind of more and more power over my child. I'm really worried about this influence, and the parents' fear is starting to go through the roof, and all they want to do is say, no, you cannot date that person, or start saying negative things about that person. What do you do as a parent? According to what you just said, what is your response instead of that?
Yeah. What I always say is, like, this is the moment where it's totally okay as a parent to completely fake it. Meaning I actually just try to act super calm. Well, tell me what you like about the person. I try to be interested about them, because it takes some of the power out of it. When, sometimes some personalities just kind of like to rebel. I mean, I think some kids are just more, that's the way they go.
Some learn the hard way, some learn the easy way.
Exactly.
True.
Exactly. And whether they're a pleaser or a rebel, to have a conversation, just like you would with, like, if you were dating someone, in an imaginary world, like a friend of mine or a friend's kid, I could easily ask them, oh, tell me what you like about him. I would just be interested. It's when we get so fearful because it's wrapped up in things about ourselves, maybe bad experiences we had. We walked through a bad boyfriend, and maybe we just want to protect our kid from that. That's, again, it's all about what we've been through, rather than just saying, hey, tell me about this person. So who are their friends? Just being interested in it, in who they are. I think that's a great place to begin. And, I think it's fine to have guidelines about dating and things like that, like, how much time they can spend together. But I think as much as we can keep the door open, the wiser we will be, because they have a lot of freedom at this age. You can't lock them in their room. So, and sometimes what's forbidden becomes the most enticing thing. Whereas most things really will run their course, especially in the teen years. Very few people actually end up marrying these people. I'd actually be a little more concerned with my 24-year-old if they were dating someone who felt really abusive in some way or unkind. But in the teen years, I think one of our goals is to keep the conversation going. And so, really bad decisions can be made in the teen years. So it's hard. So I keep the conversation going and pray a lot, like those two things. But yeah, I'm big on asking questions with kids in a loving way, in an interested way. It doesn't prevent them from making mistakes, but it might keep them talking to you. And I think that really matters.
Yeah, there's that dynamic of, you talk to me and you tell me things, and now there needs to be a consequence. So tell me things. And I'm just thinking of a conversation I had a couple days ago, and I told my husband, I don't know if I'm really doing myself any favors here, because I'm maybe not keeping that door open by my responses. She's never going to tell me anything again. So I think we do have that balance of always trying to know. I do have a responsibility as your parent to keep you safe and to hold some standards here. And at the same time, I recognize you are growing up and you are starting to have opinions and you are starting to have freedom and you are in high school. And so just, it is all of that. And I also want to say, you mentioned that we get wiser as we get older, or maybe you didn't say it in those exact words, but that's how I took it. And so we also parent differently as we've had more kids, right? And so the way that we parent our fourth child may be different than the way that we parent our first.
And poor first children.
I know.
Poor first children.
I feel like I have constant repair that needs to happen. But it is because I think we probably have walked through some things and have realized, maybe faced some of our fears. Like, the world did not end when we parented through this. We all got through it, and it's going to be okay. And just kind of the long view, holding that long view as we parent our teenagers of, this is a blip. I really wish this wasn't a blip. Like, I really wish this wasn't. And it is. And so we need to move forward and trust that God is going to do what God does, which is use all things for his good and redeem what can be redeemed here.
Yeah. I think what you're saying, though, is so important because, you know, that we can't get them out of the situation necessarily. Especially, you know, I look back and I think there's a verse that says, reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And sometimes just holding our tongue, maybe that's what we learn as we age. Just saying less is wisdom. And again, I think this is really different with a 19-year-old and a 12-year-old. Again, I'm going to say a lot more to my 12-year-old and going to have a lot more boundaries with my 12-year-old. My 19-year-old, I'm going to be listening a lot and trying to keep the relationship open because I don't have the same ability to even control their world, like what they're allowed to do at 19. And so I think what we're trying to do in the teen years, honestly, in some ways, is prevent as much damage as we can. Because I bet if the three of us were really honest, I have things that were said to me in my teen years that still haunt me today. Yeah, I mean, whether it's about how we look, about how we act or whatever, and they come back in our head and we're like, am I that person? Am I that? So part of my goal as a parent in some ways is to do the least amount of damage as I can when I'm working with my teen. And to remember my behavior and my response is my response. My kid might come in grumpy. My kid might come in slamming doors and in a really sour mood. And they might be ready for a fight. I'm the adult in the room. So I need to act like the adult. And sometimes that just means letting him come in and slam the door and be disrespectful and say to myself, I'm going to handle that in an hour when things have had time to cool down. But I'm not going to get in a fighting war with them about this right now. So wisdom, even in when we tell our kids things and correct their behavior, I have just found if I wait an hour and a half and talk when things are calmer, I don't say wrong things. And that really helps the conversation go better.
Yeah, you're taking responsibility for yourself and how you're showing up. It's so interesting because I'm a coach, and one of the things they teach us in training is pay attention to how you internally are responding to the person you're coaching, because that actually is also determining the coaching session, which I think is so interesting, right? It's not just what they're saying, it's actually how I'm responding. And so I have to be aware of what's happening inside of me. And it's the same concept. It's the exact same concept. We have to be aware of what's being triggered inside of us as the parent, whether that is fear or whether that's an old wound that we have, whatever it is, right? That how are we being triggered that then is determining how we are responding to this child, because that's essential. And one of the things that helps me is, instead of asking why, to ask what. So instead of saying, God, why is this happening? Or why is this way? Asking, God, what are you doing in me, through me, in that child, through that child, right? Like really switching that question. And so do you have some other ways that are helpful of kind of checking our own temperature?
That's good. Mine is normally like, dear Jesus, help me.
Yeah.
So that's a really good. I like the what. That's a new question, because normally all I can get out is, I don't even know what to ask for. I don't even know what to ask for some days in it all. And yet he still answers in his kindness when I'm just like, please help me, because I don't know what to do with this. I think there are some really practical things sometimes we don't think about as families of teens. In the book I talk about, I actually see as three of the biggest difficulties, which are not sex, drugs, and rock and roll that maybe we faced back in the 80s. I actually think it's sports and activities, it's scholastic achievement, and it's social acceptance. Those are the three what I call idols of our age that I think really raise the temperature in parenting teens right now. And that has, yeah, we haven't even discussed cell phones and all of that comes, but that can be, like socially acceptable. Like, well, you have to have one at 12 or you'll not have any friends, and these questions that come up. But if I had to hit on one thing, it would actually be sports and activities. I think it is just doing so much to the family in our stress levels. So one reason the temperature is so constantly hot is because we're having to run from activity to activity, and parents are stressed with one another. We're stressed with all the kids. It's this constant shuffle. Okay, now you spent 3 hours at your sporting event. Well, now you better get on that homework assignment. So as a mom, we're on all the time. Gosh, that's exhausting. And so, and at some point we have to say, these are our choices. Yeah, this is a choice we are making as a society, to say our kid needs to be in an activity every day, and we never have family dinners together, and we are going to try to get everyone in an Ivy League when no one needs to go to an Ivy League to live a happy, full life. Yeah, I mean, like, we're making these cultural choices, and I think we maybe need to reevaluate. Maybe that's not what happiness is. Like, what's the end game there? Are you really going to be happy if you play a sport in college? Are you really going to be satisfied if you go to the Ivy League? Are you really going to be, so socially popular because you had a cell phone at 12? Like, I don't, yeah. I mean, when you step back and say, maybe it would really matter that our family had family dinners every night, and we're going to fight for that. Maybe it would really matter that we have space to actually get a little bored and do a puzzle as a family. And so I think there are some proactive things we can do that can really help lower, I like to say, lower the temperature of the teenage years. But our teens aren't aware enough to make those choices. We have to be the parents and really say, what's best for our family? Is my kid getting enough sleep? I mean, it's just biological fact they need more sleep. And yet so many teens do not get the amount of sleep they do. Well, that leads to greater rates of depression. That leads to greater problems down the road in other areas. And we're like, oh, but they have to be at all these things or they won't be well-rounded.
Yeah.
Who cares if they're well-rounded?
Right. I know.
I mean, like,
it drives me crazy.
Yeah. So
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I think a paradigm question that could be asked is this helping us, all of us in this house, love God and love others more?
Yeah.
And so I think being part of a team can be, but to what cost? Yes. At what cost? Because there's trade-offs. And so we in our house are always talking about trade-offs. If we do this, then we're giving up this. Okay. Are we okay with that? And it's intentionality about it. And there is a little bit of counterculturalism in that, and the environment that you put yourself into. Depending on where you live in the country, you may have some choice in that. Some people can choose where they send their kids to school and some people can't. I think, for example, we have chosen to not send our kids to a really rigorous academic school where that's the expectation for every student. It's available to kids if they want it. And so what we've told our kids is, this is available to you. I think because of who you are, it would be a good thing for you to take these challenging classes because you can handle it, and a challenge is good. But the point where it becomes overwhelming, we're opting out of that particular class. That, for some of our friends, not so much at our high school, but who have chosen to send their kids to other high schools because they want that academic rigor, it's hard for them to relate to. And so to be able to say, it's okay, we can make different choices in this, and not make it a thing with other people, but just say, it's okay. We're just going to do it the way that we do it.
That's right.
In our family, I was taught when my kids were little through my MOPS group to say, in our family, what we value is getting good rest and sleep. And so we're not going to push ourselves. That's right.
And that's such a gift to our kids. And again, like my kids have played sports, they've done activities that, but they've also had some time to, I call it piddle time, just be bored, not unstructured boredom. We know that's bad for kids to have too much time, but normally we're talking about like a 7-year-old there who has too much time on their hands and gets into trouble or whatever. I don't see many teens I know just with all this time on their hands. Most of them work harder than most adults I know. When you look at their days and they're so scheduled. And I mean, my son's college, his freshman year, had 9 suicides. 9. And these are kids, I get the sense they worked really hard to get into that school. And then they get there and they're like, what is my life about? I mean, we have huge crises going on with how kids are doing. And I just think we're missing some big things. And sometimes you just need, to be slower and be able to take care of your mental health. But when you're constantly, being pushed and pushed and pushed, and I feel like our kids are really hurting from this. And social media plays a role in all of that. I mean, there are so many factors coming in, but any factor we can make a little bit better, I think is worth trying with our kids.
I have seen that in the Barna research, that the amount of pressure that kids feel is different than previous generations. They feel the pressure in a way that's different. And yes, technology is a part of that, but also just the ramp up of all of these things, of doing club sports by the time you're 7 or 8. All of that plays into this level of pressure that kids feel, that is now documented in research, which I think is interesting. So, okay, Melissa, as we close today, what would be your final charge or encouragement to parents who are in this season with their kids?
I think my biggest piece of hope is this: the basics that God asks of us: read the Bible, pray, be in church. Those simple things are some of the biggest gifts you can give to your teenager. Not that you're forcing them to pray or forcing them to read the Bible, but that you are reading the Bible and that you are praying for them. That will actually change us as parents. And what's hopeful about that in my mind is I can control that. I'm going to put myself in church. I'm going to hear the word taught every week because my soul needs that. That's the oxygen I need before I try to put the oxygen mask on someone else. Those simple acts of being in God's word, being a mom of prayer, and being in church, and I call it a 3-legged stool. That foundation is the foundation we as parents need to walk through this season well. And that doesn't have anything to do with culture. That doesn't have anything to do with how our teens doing. That's fully how the Lord can really work in our lives. And so I just encourage you, get up a few minutes early, listen to God. His word will comfort and encourage you. Pour all your fears and anxieties out to him, and then go on Sunday mornings and worship with others. And it changes our lives. And it's what we need as moms of teens.
Thank you, Melissa. So appreciate you being on today.
Thanks for having me.